Hey everyone, welcome back to UX Design to Win in Business. My name is Nils, and today I have a very dear friend and special guest on the show. My old friend from Berlin, Sylvia, who's in Singapore for a longer time and who I know from her product management days. But Sylvia, maybe you can give a little intro for people who don't know you.
Happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Nice change to be on a podcast, and especially on one of the first episodes of your podcast. As you said, I'm a product person. Spend most of my career in building software, consumer products mostly. Started out in Europe. I did a bit of work for a startup also in Japan. That was before we met in Berlin. And then after Berlin, I quickly moved to Singapore. So there's a colorful mix of my European work experience and building products for Europe. And then also a bunch of Asian countries.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so cool. And how long have you been working in Singapore now? It's already a while, right?
Yeah, we moved here 2013, so it's now already more than 11 years that I'm here.
Amazing. Yeah. And so, yeah, we met back at our rocket internet venture, Glossy Box, right? Like you were my product manager. I was front end dev at the time. And that was how we met. And then we got this chance to have another project together. I think, I don't know if that's your last job or if there was one in between. Let's see. But
Yeah, that was
Zalora,
awesome.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Nice. Yeah, and I thought we could have a conversation about about user experience and your perspective as a product person, especially now with you being in Southeast Asia. Like I already noticed when I came over for our project for a month at Zalora back then, that I was not prepared for the cultural differences, not even in working in the team, but like the first stories that I heard back then were that the platform was imported from Europe to be built upon for the Southeast Asian market, and that there were just like the most basic issues that I remember that the team told me about, that the account sign up was primarily focused on email and password, and nobody really knew what to do with email and password in Southeast Asia. And that really struck me. It was like, wow, it's so like there's so fundamental differences in how this experience has to be designed for people. Um, and yeah, I mean, maybe you can elaborate a little bit more how it all started out for you when you moved to Singapore and started to work in
Yeah.
this environment.
Actually, I would say the start of it was when we were working in Berlin together, because at that company I was brought onto the team to manage the international rollout. And so as a product manager, my first job was actually to understand okay, how do we localize for these markets? And we had the most ambitious and ridiculous plans, um, which I guess to my own surprise, we launched so many countries in the first year. A
I
lot of them,
remember.
but yeah. So to be fair, I think now looking back, I think localizing among European countries was is easier than if you go even further and just the differences are magnified. But that was my first taste, so I think I was definitely sensitive towards, okay, there's differences. It's beyond just the language, and okay, let's translate. There's differences in how people think about the checkout experience, how to sign up for an account. Then payment methods are still to this day very, very different among different countries. Also here within Southeast Asia.
Yeah.
Um,
So it's
and
not
then
just everyone has a MasterCard on their iPhone
not at
and
all.
that's it.
Not at all. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is the thing. I think as someone who was born and raised in Germany, and you have easily this exposure to like the neighboring countries, and I think most of us Europeans probably think we see obviously the differences between the markets and the countries. But I have to say, since I came to Southeast Asia, and typically, especially if you work for a Singaporean company, you also look at different markets in the region. But the difference is that bigger. So let's go back to the language. Not everyone is using the alphabet. They might have different fonts, like down to like, credit card is not a given. Actually, even to this day, in the emerging markets, like in the Philippines or in Indonesia, people might not have a bank account. So what's interesting is like, especially in the last 10 years, they kind of jump certain steps, evolutionary steps that you can see in the US or in Europe, and it jumped straight to like the digital wallet. Like people grow up, without but they might have a digital wallet, like, really early on. That's their main payment method, online and offline.
No, awesome. Yeah, and I mean, so I remember maybe to start slowly because I feel like there's like a huge story here, especially for business owners thinking about. I'm not even sure how this topic is approached. Like I remember that I read this book from Netflix, for example, where they very vividly described their international rollout. The first time they went out of the US, and then what happened. And I remember that I had to laugh out loud for a couple of pages because like the magnitude of problems, like they described, like they were not prepared. Like they tried to do whatever they did in the US and were like completely surprised that nothing of this worked, not even a little bit. And they started with Europe. Like I think there was like a couple of European countries, and then they went into, South America, Southeast Asia, and then like there was this story of how I always thought like the Germans were the most upfront and direct in their communication, which is like already a problem with Americans. And so I also remember that when I visited you at Singapore, that I was reading this tiny book, like a primer on how to not be rude in Southeast Asia. I thought, woo, danger zone. And then they described that the Dutch people were even worse in that regard than the Germans. It was so. But yeah, like when we were rolling out in Europe, I think back then when I didn't consider what it means to go onto like a market like Southeast Asia, right? Like we were already discussing, well, Spain is maybe very different than Germany, right? And then the French people, and we really have to pay attention. But so, like you're dealing with stuff like, I don't know, from Vietnam all the way to, I don't know, what are all the countries that you had to deal with at Zalora?
Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, Thailand. Yeah, it's like you maybe start with looking at the basics, and especially in e-commerce, what's happening in the physical world, like different shipping providers, different shipping methods, right? Different ways how customers get the goods. So that has to be embedded in the experience, and you need to, as a product manager, also at the business teams, you need to pick the things that work for your target audience. And as it gets more digital, like payment methods are of course also always one of the first things to consider. And then what about your branding and just the overall message and the value proposition? People care about different things, especially if you come with a new business model or a new idea that has never been existed in one of those markets. Think about like how do people perceive you? So trust is, I think, always a thing, how to build trust. And that also, like, you might have to do in different ways, Some people, some cultures, I think, gain trust faster if you say like, oh, this was successful in Europe, this was successful in the US. Others are like highly skeptical, and they're like, oh, if this was built for the US market, it's never going to work here, because we're very different.
just
Yeah.
per se.
Yeah, so you can go so wrong depending on like what messaging you pick, and you really need to do your homework and understand who's my target audience, what's their mindset, what's the first impression when they see your product, be it your digital or your physical product, and how to go from there. Yeah, how to start
Yeah.
the story.
And that, like you said, like a couple of very interesting things, like from your messaging, your brand, like how to build your trust and all of this. Um, I think this is something that is very interesting, maybe to expand a little bit onto how this feeds into user experience, I suppose. Like the way I see it is that we're trying to get to what is user experience even, like how can you design for a good user experience. And I have the feeling that those points that you mentioned, they feed into the overall user experience that
Yeah.
ideally comes out that people trust you, right?
Yeah.
Like, is there, and maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how to get there. Like, how did you, acquire all this individual knowledge? Like, how can people go about understanding what the target audience needs and wants to extend that trust towards your business?
Yeah. I think at the very beginning, before you start to build something or start to localize your product, um, it's about doing the market and the customer research. Like exactly understanding what is already there. Maybe there's competition there, or maybe there's like, indirect competition that people are going to start comparing you to. Like all of these things, I think you need to know before you start to think about like what are we going to do about our product and our brand, and then channels all the ideas that you have, I think, hopefully in the right direction. And visiting, I think anyone who's going to a new market, for sure you have to, it's not enough to just do the desktop research, but to really show up, even if it's just a few days, and get a sense of, and simple things like going around the capital of a specific country, seeing what's people's lifestyle, how do they spend their time, how do they go out and eat, etc. Like, yeah, if it's a consumer product, like I'm talking about, mostly I think about consumer products, it's crucial to understand, and can, I think, prevent you from making the most basic mistakes with just
Like not offering the right payment method, for example.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And just as a starting point, I think to develop that empathy. On the
Yeah.
other hand, I have to say, I think then you'll probably quickly realize you need some people on the ground to help you with the expansion. It's very hard, even though, I mean, with globalization and everything feels so close and travel has become so easy. But at the end of the day, if you jump around the globe and go to different markets, it's still very crucial you have some experts on the ground. Yeah.
Who
And sometimes
continuously watch what's happening also, right?
yeah, you have deeper knowledge. Like you do need also some specialists. It's not enough. It's a starting point to spend a few days in this new market and hopefully meet some of your target customers. But if anything, that's probably then, depending where you go, the realization, okay, I think I need some people on the ground who've actually launched
Yeah.
the product here, gone to market, and who know more in depth how we can make this a success.
Crazy. So, yeah, I mean, for people looking to expand into a new market, let's go check. Like, don't just read about it, but then go check, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's not enough to just chuck the translation files onto DeepL and be done with it, right? Like, that's not gonna cut it, probably. And then have people on the ground. Like, I think that is something that is probably not necessarily straightforward to plan with. If you're just, as you say, it's a globalized world. I can probably just have like a digital presence, and then countries just work very differently. I think that is super interesting. And those people on the ground, would you say they have to be UX designers? Or, like, how does this, I'm interested in this whole, how do you go about understanding the differences, and then how do they end up in your product so you actually do it the right way, or you actually address the right need and challenge,
Yeah.
because like that seems like asking people is always one thing, but then to learn the right thing from it and to actually act upon it is, I guess, another thing, right?
Yeah. So I mean, I'm talking also a lot, I think, from the perspective of an entrepreneur, or maybe if it's a bigger company, specific business division that has this target, okay, let's go abroad. I wouldn't start with a UX designer. I think someone maybe a bit more holistic, like a business development manager. And again, it can be someone maybe from your home turf who moved over, who has already spent some time there and is going over maybe first just on a trip, or immediately trying to find someone local who has spent time in the same industry or has just done something similar. I think that can give you a huge head start.
Yeah.
And more scanning the market and the customer base. And I think then with that, as the strategy becomes more written down and concrete, I think then getting specialists on board, like for example a UX designer, okay, let's change this. Yeah, but I think it can also work in a way where you still have your UX team at home in the headquarters,
Yeah.
but you have that business person or this person with like a large amount of insights than briefing the team. Yeah. I see that as well. I think that can work. Yeah.
Awesome.
And by the way,
yeah.
actually, there's another thing that comes to mind. So, especially for German companies or German entrepreneurs, the German government is actually providing a lot of help also to go abroad, in particular to markets in Asia.
Really?
Yeah, there is an organization called the Start 2 Group. I'm working with them as well as a mentor. So they bring regularly startups, in particular tech startups, to Singapore to do like market exit programs, market entry programs, and through that, people get this immediate access to like mentors who already spend a while in a specific market, and some specialists as well, and it's a huge time saver.
Awesome. And so, hey, this is also super interesting. Like, I'm honestly, since I started this podcast, I'm not even sure what a UX designer is anymore. Like, I'm starting to question the term entirely, just because I feel that user experience is not just a designer's job, Like, maybe it's their job to tie it together and to make like this strategy that everybody can work alongside, but like to create a good user experience from start to finish. Like if you have a consumer product, I don't know, if you run a platform like an e-commerce platform and you have people buy stuff, they have to find you, they have to trust you that you're actually gonna deliver the product.
Yep.
Right? Like that is useful for them. So you kind of have to really localize and not just translate your text and so on. You have to have relevant products and you have to ship them. They have to arrive. They have to hold a while. They have to have customer support. They go brrrt, like all of this whole thing, and all of that for me makes up the user's experience and not just how the platform looks or if there's like nice copy in the transaction email that you get to confirm your order, right? So if you say there are these mentors, or you would say like the first person on the ground should be like a business development manager. How do they talk to your design team? Or like how does this, how do they get the knowledge out of their head to actually do something about it,
Yeah.
What would you say, where's this process? Like that sounds super interesting.
Yeah. Mostly seen setups where the BD person does not have this awareness of like what does the tech team need, or like the one that's working on right? That's actually creating the UX. So I think that's why my approach has always been kind of the other way around. And I also, the teams that I was working with or that I was putting together, tried to make sure that we have at least one person in the team who's good at asking these questions and extracting this knowledge. And I think, yeah, there's probably some literature you can read about it as well, like how to ask the best questions, but a lot of it I think comes also with experience. And most of the time it was the designer on the team
who asked the questions.
Yes, yeah. I think product managers as well can definitely be complementary or have it's part of their work too, for sure. Yeah, but I found actually designers to be a bit more ahead on more used to this, like, okay, let me exactly understand how this works and get more into the nitty-gritty of the experience.
And so in that case, like, it almost sounds like we work a lot with user testing in general. And to me, it sounds a little bit like the biz dev person on the ground can be like this, at least for the beginning, or something like that, as an avatar that you can talk to. For instead of interviewing like a bunch of people, you can start with interviewing that person from a designer's from a product perspective in the broader sense, right? Like I imagine it like a little bit like you're probing around. Like, can people pay with this? No?
Yeah.
Okay. Crap. So how do we have to this and that, and how do you, right? So, and then you start from there, I suppose.
Exactly. Yeah. And sometimes it's also it's the only way you can do it, that you have a proxy, like a person in between, because of language barrier. Yeah. So I also
excellent
had to do
point.
this.
Yeah.
I mean, we had, when I was working for the e-commerce company, our team, majority of our team was in Singapore. And then how do you get really the deep insights from what an Indonesian customer wants? My closest proxy was to talk to our team in Indonesia and in Jakarta, right? I mean, they knew the business context very well. They had great insights also into like what people were in general interested in, what was going on in the market. They could explain those trust issues also much better than me. Than I had listened to like the original translation of whatever an Indonesian customer was talking about. So these people who can like bridge between cultures, help you overcome also language barriers, and become this proxy are incredibly important in the process.
Crazy. Awesome. I mean, I think we could probably talk for hours about this whole topic, and maybe we actually, let's see, like, I feel like there's a lot to uncover. Maybe we get the chance to do another episode, but to bring this one to a close, let's maybe summarize for what are like the key steps to design a good user experience when you're going abroad, from out of your safety zone in the country that you started out with. What would you say would be step number one?
Book a ticket.
Book a ticket and go.
Let's be very pragmatic. Book a ticket and go for a few days. See what it's really like, especially if it's a city or a country that you've never been to.
Yeah.
And if you're the person in charge, if it's like your product, your company, etc. Highly valuable.
You gotta go, right? You gotta go yourself to know what you're talking about.
Exactly.
I can imagine.
And then from there, the next step, if you're still coming back, if you're still convinced this is something we want to tackle, this is something we can tackle as well, because most of the time it's also quite a sizable investment depending on where. Then I think it's about like, how do you, how can you bridge between your home turf and this new location? Who are the people that can help you? Could be like accelerators, could be partnerships, could be organizations like the one that I mentioned before, or it could be going straight to like, let's hire our first person or find our first person on the ground and then like build everything from there.
That is very cool. That is very cool, and I think to think in these terms, like to turn it around like this, not to start from a spreadsheet, but to buy a ticket and go, and to understand how is everything there. Like to really think from if I would be someone in my country who would buy something from an international business, how would I feel about it? Which questions would I probably apply to assess if I'm willing to, try and buy a product from this platform, I suppose, right? Like you can also flip it around and try to buy something from a South American shop and see how you feel about it, because that's the way that people will be weirded out about what you're going to do, because you're not going to nail it in the first go, I suppose. Yeah, this is a super interesting topic that I'd love to expand on in the future. But for today, I think that was super helpful already. And I really want to thank you for coming on and for telling people about this. Like I remember that you a couple years back had this talk, I think, where people flew you into Frankfurt to
It's already
talk.
a while back, but yes.
It's a while back, right? But you were telling people how it is to go to Southeast Asia, and it's just a major thing. Like if we can close with anything, then probably that it's not willy-nilly. You can't just translate your platform and be done with it.
Exactly.
Cool. Thank you, Sylvia, for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. How do you like my microphone, by the way?
Yeah, I love your microphone. I'm gonna get like one for mine too.
I knew you would have the professional setup, so I had to come up with something really quick.
I absolutely love it. Cool. All right. Hope to see you in another episode. And warte, ich muss kurz schneiden. And then everyone else, see you in a future episode of the podcast where we try to uncover how to really apply user experience to the success of your business. Bye.
Bye-bye.